From Barcelona's old harbour up to the famous Plaça de Catalunya, a thread of green weaves up through the old city. This is Barcelona's lifeline, its 24-hour street. This is the Ramblas. The Ramblas has survived running gun battles and raging fires. It's alive to the scent of flowers and has suffered the smell of death. Fanatics and fighters, vendors and revelers. They all have their stories day and night. Here on the Ramblas. The Ramblas meanders through Barcelona's old town for just over a mile, from the old harbour up to the Plaça de Catalunya. La Rambla, or Las Rambas as the locals say, is in fact 5 old streets running end to end. They have their own word for this street, Ramblajan. Ramblajan means to walk the Ramblas, a term that sprang up in the 1980s. This must be the only street in the world with its own verb. At the top of the Ramblas, near the Plaça de Catalunya, crowds pour in and out of the metro. This is the Ramblas de Canaletes, named after the small fountain here. They say that if you take a sip from this fountain, you're bound to come back to Barcelona. And if you don't want to walk, there are seats scattered around the top section. And for some, that's as far as they want to go. In the middle of the street, a colorful mosaic created by local artist Mayo marks the spot where the Ramblas began. This is where the medieval city gate stood. The Ramblas is named after a dried-up river which ran just outside the city walls until the 14th century and was a market space where country folk brought produce and livestock into the city. Over the years, buildings appeared and the street became incorporated into the city walls. By the 18th century, the Ramblas was an established street, popular for walking and social gatherings. Since 1881, the Ramblas has been home to the city's official clock, the Hora Oficial, ticking away the minutes on this 24-hour street. It's around this time in the morning that Barcelonans like to take a break for a little something, and the Escriba pastry shop at number 83 on the Ramblas is just the place. But the delicacies inside are upstaged by the stunning mosaics and decorations on the outside. This is modernisme, the local version of Art Nouveau. And the name most commonly connected to modernisme is that of Barcelona's most famous architect, Antoni Gaudi. Gaudi made his colorful mark all over Barcelona, including a distinct impression on the streets around the Ramblas. The Palo Güell building just off the Ramblas is one of his earliest works and was specially commissioned by his patron, Eusebi Güell. The rooftop of the Palo Güell shows Gaudi at his brightest and most colorful. His patron obviously gave him a free hand with the crockery, too. Some of the broken tiles reveal the hallmark of a very expensive dinnerware set. It was unusual for a wealthy industrialist like Güell to live in the inner city, but he adored the Ramblas and wanted his new palace to be as close as possible. he asked Gaudi to build a secret passage linking this new building to his old house on the Ramblas. Gaudi's extraordinary and sensuous style conjures up an adventurous, sexy, nonconformist personality. But the interior of the palace shows Gaudi to be a very different man. Gaudi was a devout Catholic and deeply conservative. Despite the sensuous colors and voluptuous shapes in his work, in his personal life, he was unable to relate intimately to women, and it's believed he died a virgin. He was a stubborn man and a loner, obsessed with ideas of obedience, penance, and death. Later in his life, Gaudi became an unkempt recluse, living in a shack on the site of his last and still unfinished building, the Sagrada Familia Church, becoming increasingly obsessed with his God. One morning in June 1926, a ragged-looking tramp shuffled distractedly along, straight into the path of an oncoming tram. His empty pockets gave no clue to his identity. His battered body was taken to the hospital Santa Creu, just off the Ramblas, where he lay dying in a pauper's cot. It wasn't until days later that the man was identified as Spain's foremost architect, Antoni Gaudi. At his funeral, 10,000 people came to pay their respects. Gaudi's religious intensity and work for the church has inspired a group of Catholics to campaign for him to be made a saint. Whether or not this does happen, Gaudi will always be known here as God's architect. The Ramblas in Barcelona has always been an ideal place for selling. Bird sellers have traditionally monopolized this section, the Ramblas of the birds. And the cacophony is a constant reminder of Barcelona's curious obsession with our feathered friends. In the early 1900s, there was a kiosk here selling something quite different. At a time when many had neither the means or ability to write, letter writers on the Ramblas did brisk business, declarations of love, legal petitions, vital correspondence. As the deafening noise of birds fades, the strong scent of the next section takes over, the Ramblas of the flowers. Signora Carolina has been selling flowers here since she was a child. She's the 5th generation of her family to take up this particular stall and knows all the stories of the Ramblas flower girls.
Oh yes, I know, because you see in my great-grandmother's time all the famous poets and painters, such as Raymond Casas, well, they all met here by the stall.
Carolina's great-grandmother witnessed the blossoming love affair between famous painter Raymond Casas and one of the Ramblas flower girls. He began by painting her at her stall and ended up marrying her. Ever since the very beginnings of the Ramblas, there's always been a marketplace here, at the Plaza de Boqueria. The name Boqueria dates from the 13th century, meaning a table of fresh meat laid out for sale. Today's famous market, in its 1830s building, has more than just a plate of meat to show. Just inside the Boqueria is the tiny bar that sustains the stall holders and shoppers alike. El Pinocho has run this bar for many years and knows everything there is to know about the market.
The Boqueria is one of the most important markets in Europe. It makes up a family with the Ramblas. They are inseparable, the Ramblas and the Boqueria market.
The Boqueria has come a long way since its humble beginnings, and it's now a prestigious place to earn a living. The hundreds of stalls are passed down from generation to generation, like treasured family heirlooms. The Hora Oficial, Barcelona's official timepiece, moves on. But the traditional Spanish siesta is not for the Ramblas. The Ramblas has been home to informal street entertainment for years. But if you're after a more traditional theatrical experience, head for the middle of the street, just beyond the Miro mosaic. The Gran Teatro del Liceo, the famous Barcelona opera house, has 2,340 seats, 18,000 subscribers, and one of the most technologically advanced stage systems in the operatic world. The Liceo has produced drama, passion, and disaster throughout its history, and that's off stage as well as on. Superstition engulfed the Liceo from the beginning, when this La Scala lookalike was built on the site of a convent that had been burnt during the anti-clerical protest of 1835. Once built, the opera house too attracted violent protest. In 1893, Santiago Salvador, a local anarchist, went to the opera on a mission to shake up the middle-class establishment. He made his way to the gods, the highest sections of the auditorium where the cheap seats were. Below him, in all their finery, an unsuspecting audience was riveted to the second act of a Rossini opera. From the fifth-floor balcony, Salvador hurled a bomb. It landed on the 13th row of the stalls. 20 people were killed. He threw a second bomb, but in a bizarre twist of fate, it landed in the lap of a woman already killed, and it didn't explode. Salvador was arrested, tried, and found guilty. In a gruesome end to this dramatic tale, he was publicly garroted for his crime. Most recently, in 1994, an electrical fault caused a fire which almost destroyed the opera house in less than 5 hours. It took millions of dollars and 3.5 years of reconstruction to bring the building to its present state. Barcelona is situated in the middle of Catalonia, a small but economically important region in eastern Spain, which used to be a separate state. And on the Ramblas today, there are groups who wish this were still the case. The origin of the Catalan flag comes with a popular story. In the 9th century, a ruler named Guifré el Pelós, that's Wilfrid the Hairy to us, lay wounded in a battle. His overlord, Charles the Bald, noticed his plain shield with no flag or coat of arms. Dipping his hand into Wilfrid's blood, he drew 4 bloody stripes on the gold shield. Thus, Wilfrid the Hairy got his stripes, and the Catalonia region got their flag. The Catalan flag flies high next to the national Spanish flag these days. Catalonia is now an autonomous region with its own local government, and the Catalan language flourishes on the streets of Barcelona. But it wasn't always so. Between 1936 and 1939, more than 500,000 people died in the Spanish Civil War, fought between left-wing Republicans and the right-wing forces of Generalissimo Franco. Both sides called for international support. Franco's came from Hitler and Mussolini. Against them, 35,000 volunteers came from all over the world to support the Republicans. They formed the International Brigades. One volunteer who came to fight against fascism was Englishman Eric Blair. Victor Alba was a local journalist at the time and remembers the quiet Englishman.
One day the press association called me and said, "Look, you speak French. We have an English journalist arrived who speaks French like you." And they presented me to him. Eric, how do you do? I took him to all the places where there'd been battles. I took him all over Barcelona.
Victor Alba could never have known it then, but the Englishman would go on to become George Orwell, famous writer of Animal Farm and 1984. His book about the Spanish Civil War is called Homage to Catalonia. In it, he describes how the various anti-Franco groups in Barcelona ended up in gun battles against each other on the Ramblas.
I was halfway down the Ramblas when I heard several rifle shots and saw some youths with rifles in their hands. I thought instantly, it started. The crowd was surging into the metro station. A crowd of panic-stricken people were rushing down the Ramblas to take cover.
The war made us. Before the war, Orwell was Orwell, a writer, a bit on the left. But after the war, Orwell was Orwell, just like I became me.
But Orwell and Victor Alba were on the losing side. Franco's fascists won the war in 1939, bringing in the period of right-wing dictatorship which ruled Spain for nearly 40 years. The final stretch of the Ramblas, Barcelona's main walkway, stretches down to the harbor. Here, the huge 200-foot-high monument to Christopher Columbus towers over the street. It was built to commemorate his visit to Barcelona in 1493. It was cast from 30 tons of bronze, melted down from old cannons. He should, of course, be pointing majestically to the New World, but in fact, he's actually pointing to Africa. The lower end of the Ramblas has always been associated with sexual adventure. Pablo Picasso was reputed to be a regular of the brothels and prostitutes around the Ramblas. He admitted that his sex life started early. "I didn't wait for the age of reason," he said. "If I had, I might not have started at all." One of his favorite brothels was on the Quai d'Avignon, just off the Ramblas, where he was supposed to have lost his virginity. Nowadays, sex and sexuality, of all persuasions, is on show on the Ramblas in the Erotic Museum. Transvestite dolls are on display in here, but on the Ramblas, you can find the real thing. Gina is not all she appears to be. She, or he, lives in the red light district and has been working the Ramblas for the last 8 years.
The
Ramblas for me is the most beautiful place in Barcelona. Foreigners from all over the world come here. They all pass through the Ramblas.
40 or so years ago, people did jail time for being gay in Spain. But the latter-day Ramblas is a tolerant and relatively safe place for transvestites like Gina to earn a living.
This is where the most work is for us, for boy-girls like me.
Nowadays, people like Gina can survive here, accepted as part of the scene on the Ramblas. As the Ramblas clock ticks on, the street takes on its nighttime mood. There are more bars and cafes in Spain than in all the other European Union countries put together. And at the top of the Ramblas is a very famous cocktail bar, the Buenos. Dolores is the daughter of a well-known Cuban cocktail maker who brought the cocktail fashion to Spain in 1933. In the bar Buenos, they've been pouring fancy drinks from many a famous name ever since.
Hemingway? He was one of them. My father served him cocktails in Havana, and he came here to Barcelona. Many celebrities came here. Errol Flynn, Ava Gardner, yes, and Somerset Maugham.
We also served the Queen a cocktail, but with no alcohol.
There's plenty to do on the Ramblas at night. From flamenco dancing to disco and jazz. And if you're on the Ramblas during the Festival de la Mercè in late September, the party goes on all night. The Mercè is in honor of the patron saint of Barcelona, and the Ramblas is taken over by traditional giants, dragons, and devils from surrounding regions. Not only at festival time that the Ramblas parties all night. All through the year, at any time, locals and visitors are drawn to this magical street. People come to the Ramblas to discover its fascinating stories, to sample its wares, to drink in its atmosphere, and to soak up its vitality. The Ramblas is Barcelona's 24-hour playground.